Welcome to Feminism Today, everyone. I'm Sophia Johnson in New York. A leaked recording with prominent Los Angeles City Council members Nuri Martinez, Gil Cedillo, and Kevin De Leon revealed them making racist remarks and trying to consolidate districts to favor certain Latino communities at the expense of others. In its wake, the incident has surfaced a discussion within Latino communities about who represents them and the power and pitfalls of identity politics. Nuri Martinez, the former president of the city council, has since been forced to step down, but advocates say the incident shows there is still work to be done when it comes to Latino representation across California. We're joined now by Odilia Romero, co-founder and executive director of CIELO, to discuss anti-Blackness and colorism within the Latino community. Odilia Romero, welcome to Feminism Today. Now, the uproar was triggered by a leaked recording of crude, racist comments from a nearly year-old meeting, which also provided an unvarnished look into City Hall's racial rivalries. Those involved in the forum were all Latinos. I want you to help us unpack a little bit, because I really think there is a lot to unpack from the leaked audio. When you first heard it, what stood out most to you?
When I first heard it, I was not surprised at all. So CIELO exists to constantly combat these comments on a daily basis in institutions, in our daily lives, in a supermarket, because these comments are often used in a derogatory way towards Indigenous people and Black people. Right. So I was not surprised. And I knew this conversation probably happened, but there was never a proof, right? For us, this is the proof of how racist Latinidad is. And by that, not every Latino, there's great allies out there, but Latinidad is this narrative that erases Indigenous people, erases Black people that come from Latin America as well. So this was just like you got caught with what is it? The English saying? I know what is in Spanish with the they got caught.
Yeah.
That is the only difference, because those comments I'm sure happen in multiple conversations.
Sure.
I just couldn't prove it. I could not prove ever the racism of Latinidad. So I wasn't surprised at all.
Is this just about, as someone on the right might call it, council culture?
No. Latinidad is dangerous, and I will explain why. It's not about the council culture. These people, 4 important people, were having a conversation about the redistribution of the districts. They were anti-Indigenous, anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous sentiment. But more than that, some of the Latinos, oh my God, that's a whole other conversation, but we've had conversations with other Latino organizations, other Indigenous organizations, and they're like, you're decapitating the Latino power by asking for the resignation. You don't understand politics, you Indian woman, basically. And then I said, well, okay, they're like, you're short, you're dark.
Yeah.
When I think of you as a very smart Mexican woman. I don't think of you as an Indigenous woman.
Yeah.
So these are the comments I've gotten. So I'm like, okay, fine. Let's put that aside. Those comments aside, and let's talk about how they didn't want nobody progressive coming in.
Yeah.
They were trying to dismantle the community coalition, like not limit their power. This was a conversation against poor people. If you want to talk about the color.
Yeah.
The redistribution, their political power, their political gain, their connections to power and money for future, for whatever, I need monies for my campaign. They
Mm-hmm.
were building economic power for themselves. They
Mm.
didn't care about the renters. They didn't care about indigenous people. They didn't care about black people. And,
Mm.
and but it's not about cancel culture. Going back to your question, no, no, no. Their comments, their actions impacts poor people, indigenous
Yeah.
people, Latinos, Black, Afro Latinos. The next time we have a conversation about redistricting will be in 10 years. Them resigning is not going to solve the problem because it's systemic, right? So
Yeah.
um, they're going to continue having these conversations. The people that are remain in politics around our country would be more careful, or if they continue having these conversations relatives that don't speak Spanish and English, like first you have to know your constituents, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because that comment, where do they come from? We come from your neighborhood. We're
Yeah.
part of your neighborhood. So if you don't know where we come from, if you don't know who we are, then we have serious issue. And of course, there has to be a plan on how to increment services for the people in your area that don't speak Spanish, that don't speak English, and that are not are only indigenous.
Yeah. I wonder if, and maybe to what extent, this is having an effect on the mayor, or may have an effect on the mayoral race and down ballot tickets for Democrats. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's dangerous, right? Oh, so I was telling you, like they tell us this, like like it's our fault for asking for them to resign, like we're causing a problem and dismantling the Latino power. But I'm sorry, you did this to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You sat there and made these comments, and it's going to be seen in the ballots. Like I say, I cannot take a position about who should win or not, but
Mm.
we're going to see it. And if a Republican comes back in, it's not our fault. It is these politicians, these powerful Latino politicians, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this gaslighting that indigenous communities are going through currently,
Yeah.
after 2 weeks after, it's quite intense. Imagine I'm in a meeting and they're telling me it's your fault. You know, you're dismantling political power. You're ruining the works of hundreds of years that we made to get here. And I'm like, no, I did not. They did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having to stand up to these gaslighting, to this bullying and violence
Yeah.
is some of the aftermath that we have after 2 weeks of this incident.
I wonder what other cities can around the country can learn from this moment. What do you think are the big takeaways as we sort of um, move forward? Weigh in on this. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, um, based on the conversations that I've had with the other organizations, the Latino and Mexicans,
Hmm.
they claimed that there wasn't racism. Those were facts.
Hmm.
So that in the within that Latino community, within the Mexican community, there's a denial that there's racism, right? But Mexico has there was a recent, it's not a recent survey, but it's a survey where Mexicans do not want to be near an indigenous person or a black person.
Wow.
So the racism is there, but the Latino movement refuses to accept that there's racism, and they talk about it as, in this particular case, as facts. You are brown, you are short,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they don't understand that our shortness comes with colonization, right? This
Yeah.
is a body of exploited people of 530 years.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very poignant, and it's such an important part of the healing process in terms of the conversation we're having here. I'm going to lean into and sort of dig a little bit deeper for our viewers. Last year, the remains of 215 children were found in en masse graves on the site of former residential schools of Indigenous children in British Columbia, Canada. The news was shocking. Um, but among Indigenous people of Canada, and survivors of the country's boarding school system, it was really not a surprise. It's a brutal history that the United States and Canada share. What are your thoughts on some of the legacy of pains Indigenous peoples have had to suffer in North America, and indeed around the world?
That is such a painful topic
Yeah.
because, It's 530 years. Exactly, this incident happened at 530-year mark.
Yeah.
And it brought a lot of pain. And this violent legacy that they left is still felt today. It hasn't changed, but it's also the violence is now different. It's through language, right?
Yeah.
Language has always been part of their violence. For example, for us, um, as indigenous people from the South, we, when a mining company comes and asks for the authorization to explore our mines and work on them, there's no interpreter. So we make an agreement based on the little Spanish that we know. So we don't understand the environmental impacts because the state does not want us to understand, which later
Mm,
causes displacement. And that
mm,
displacement brings you to the United States and you are detained at the border where you're criminalized and there's no interpreters and there is no way for to tell your story of
mhm.
displacement that it was by a transnational company, be it the palm oil, be it um, the mining company. Mexico has the largest mining concessions in
Mm,
indigenous territory. So I cannot make an argument to get an asylum case or a stronger asylum case if I am not speaking the language. Once I go to school, if in my case, I'm a survivor of the school district.
yeah.
Um, Nobody knows that I speak another language. Nobody population according to the UN, and we hold 80% of the natural resources. So the violence that we have lived in the last 530 years is just going to increase
Hmm.
a lot more because capitalism wants natural resources, and we have them, but the
Yeah.
planet will only give you so much.
Some time ago, U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland announced the creation of a new unit tasked with coordinating between federal agencies on cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women. What are you looking for with this new unit?
Well, I'm not too sure about that unit, to be honest, but I think from history, we know that we could never trust the government or the government tasked to locate missing Indigenous and murdered women.
Yeah.
But the violence that Indigenous women are going through across the world is quite high.
Yeah.
In our case, more and more missing and Indigenous women. I mean, in our case, as Indigenous people from the South, the violence against us has increased a lot more than it has ever been. We have a lot of disappearance sisters. A lot of the land defenders are women, and they've disappeared. So, and we can't find them. All our land defenders, especially women, are disappearing. So it's a common tactic that the nation states and transnational corporations, of violence against indigenous people.
Yeah. For only the second time, and sort of like in an effort to heal the pain, the legacy of this pain in felt by the indigenous communities, President Biden's administration have, for the second time, officially recognized, acknowledged the indigenous people through this celebratory day. He's issued this proclamation to observe and honor indigenous and peoples and Native Americans for their resilience and contributions to American society. Do you think it's time to reevaluate the official history of indigenous people in the South and right here in the North?
Well, um, honor us by respecting our lands. Sometimes I wake up and I think to myself, I wish I didn't have to be resilient and continue resisting every day. I wish
Yeah.
one day that I could just not resist.
No, I hear you. I mean, it feels like almost as coded language, right? For just buck up, just grow a thick skin. And the reality is, it feels burdensome, right? You just want to be free. I just want to live. without the burden of carrying this heavy load just for one day. And so I do recognize, I hear what you're saying. It just feels like this idea that we keep hearing the term resilience, right? It feels like, what do you really mean by that, right?
Right. Like everybody, they're so resilient. No,
No.
we're trying to live one more day.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it one more day, be it here, be in the South, protecting our lands, protecting our languages. I mean, you don't celebrate, sure, we'll celebrate resilience, but the reality is, if there could be one day when one of us doesn't have to resist,
Yeah.
it will be great. I got a message this morning telling me, I know those words were painful, but your people are so resilient. We have to move forward. Stop
Yeah.
asking for KDL resignation. I wish I didn't have to wake up to that. I think they've used this word to talk about us, how tough and strong we are. But the reality is a survival mode that we are in at all times. So I really think, proclamations, we could have 100. We've had them. We have treaties. They've all have not respected them in the U.S. demand, because in our case, we don't have land.
Yeah.
We've lost our land. We are here. We're landless. So there are the few relatives that are continuing to struggle for their land defense in the United States. Honor them by protecting their land. As simple as that.
Can we talk a little bit about the economy? A 2018 estimate measured that some 20 million self-identified Latinx immigrants have made their way to the United States. Within these migrant communities, groups of pre-Columbian indigenous people, more than 78 distinct indigenous languages in Mexico alone, and more than 350 in South America are often overlooked, their cultures erased and lumped together by prevailing prejudice. Vogue.
Well, I think talking about the violence of nation states, when we're at home, from Sogocho, that's who I am.
Hmm.
Only I come here, and you know I become, first, in the school system, suddenly you're either Hispanic or Latino. There is no space for you to put from Sogocho.
Yeah, yeah,
A Mexican, and then you become Oaxacan, then you become Zapotec. But all these labels continue to erase of who I really am, which is a woman from Sogocho.
yeah.
And that conversation with Vogue, it was about the broader how the Latine movement erases our existence.
Hmm.
We don't exist. I'm not able to say it in my language because the assumption is that I speak Spanish. And I always say Latinidad is deadly, right?
Hmm.
It's either it could lead to your death, to your freedom. And uh, in one occasion, there was a gentleman that went in for a uh, surgery,
Hmm.
and he didn't speak the language. He knew how to pray, but that doesn't mean he speaks the language, because some people memorize these things, right? So what happened was, he didn't move. He didn't follow the instructions. He got blood clots in his leg that led to his amputation, that led to his death, because he didn't know what happened. So this is, I mean, literally and figuratively, Latinidad is very dangerous. And we've
Hmm.
a conversation as these four individuals, right?
Yeah.
Um, and CIELO has been doing a lot of work creating visibility of our existence, like the article that you mentioned with Vogue, coming to these interviews, um, launching a visibility campaign. We created a map for LA County where we identify the 17 indigenous languages are spoken here in
Hmm.
LA, right?
Hmm.
So because we're erased, we had to create our own data, um, so that we could exist in the numbers and take it to LA City and say, hey, here we are, we exist.
Yeah.
Or we created our own interpreters program because, our code of ethics didn't really make sense to the Western code of ethics. So we constantly have to create something for Indigenous community to better serve Indigenous community. Or as they would say, we're so resilient. We have to constantly create and make and create our own numbers, have a visibility campaign, create our own conferences, our own curriculums. I mean,
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. What should advocacy and activism look like in this era? And now with the Biden administration, especially with the ear of this administration, there's an openness here in terms of this administration seems open. What should advocacy and activism look like in this era of city council madness?
It's going to be powerful because Black and Indigenous people are speaking. It's not a brown conversation. It's Black and Indigenous, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We're using technology. We have created a lot of conversation with institutions as well about to be able to differentiate between the Latinos and us. The different, explaining that Mexico has over 68 indigenous languages, over 164 languages are spoken in Mexico, and people are in a state of shock. They're like, wait, weren't you all gone? No, we're not gone. We're and I think it's like having conversations with institutions about our existence, but the most important of all of them is we're having a conversation with our Black relatives. Like, we're not Latinos, our food is different.
Yeah.
Our music is different. Our clothing is different.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in a state of shock on both sides, actually, because then we're explaining like, hey, Indigenous people, the older Indigenous people, because the younger ones, a lot of them have gone to school. Did you know that you're able to buy a house or you're able to have a job now because of the civil rights movement, right?
Wow.
By the Black community that led this movement. So we're in this process, but I think now that I don't know how much of the president we have as Black and Indigenous, but I do think this is a great opportunity for us to have conversations amongst each other as Black and Indigenous, organizing together, learning from each other's struggles. That was similar because both Mexico and the US, were indigenous territories, and this country was built on slavery, and genocide. So I think having that conversation now is, I think it's what excites me the most.
What excites you the most, and really what incites us as well. Odilia Romero, co-founder and executive director of CIELO in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you so much, Sophia.
And that's it for our program today. Remember, you can follow me and the show on Instagram or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching Feminism Today on Free Speech TV. Join us again next week. Carolyn Webster, known by her stage name JB, the First Lady, is a powerful voice on the front lines of the hip-hop and spoken word movement. She joins us this week on Feminism Today.